Hey Twisters, for today's video we're going to be talking about the NHL teams with the brightest future. So what exactly does that mean, right? It's looking at teams a few years ahead. There are teams right now competing for a Stanley Cup, but there are other teams right now that are coming out of rebuilds, for example, and will hopefully be Stanley Cup contenders looking at probably about 4 years down the road, 3 or 4 years down the road. So this was a great suggestion from Musso Steven from one of my previous uploads, so thank you so much for suggesting that. I really like this because it's going to have a great conversation in the comments. We already received tons of good comments in our community tab, so I'll be spotlighting that with some of the teams that we're discussing here. So some factors that will weigh when discussing these teams and the idea of the bright future include the strength of the existing core of players, right? If you have young players who could still be in their prime or approaching their prime a few years from now. Salary cap management is a big one. Stability when it comes to the front office and coaching. Looking at the prospect pool, of course, some of the elite talents that could come from that group, and the idea of how long it could possibly take for them to be one of those more serious competitors out there in the NHL. And on the flip side, I've actually been talking about Stanley Cup windows with other teams in the NHL for our MVP members. So a good way to support the channel, you get access to more content like that. And apologies if I don't have a bunch of flashy graphics and stats and highlights here. I have a friend visiting from out of town. He'll be here in just a couple hours, so I have to hurry my ass up. All right, so let's get started. I actually want to start with this comment here from Beam Me Up. Devils, Sabres, Red Wings, Ottawa Senators will be Eastern powerhouses. Probably throw Montreal in there too. Well, we're going to be discussing all of those teams, in particular the ones that you saw on this video's thumbnail, because they were the most discussed in our comments. So first of all, we've got the Buffalo Sabres. We'll talk about the New Jersey Devils and the Detroit Red Wings. We'll go through some other teams that you brought up in the comments, and then I'll weigh in with a couple others that I have in mind. Let's start with the Buffalo Sabres. It's high time that they even get into the playoffs for the first time in over a decade. So we'll start with this comment here from Rolk. By far, Buffalo, Tage Thompson's only going to continue to become a mutant and a force of nature. He's been wonderful so far, just getting into the prime of his career at 25 years old. Not to mention Peyton Krebs and Alex Tuck. He was a great addition coming over in the Eichel trade. That trade's going to work out for both franchises, don't worry. Plus, you got those franchise cornerstones in Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power. And already you're getting great contributions, great improvements year over year from players like Dylan Cousins. Casey Middlestat had kind of a breakout season. Jack Quinn, a former first rounder, and JJ Peterka, let's not forget about him. And there are other wingers and other forwards in the prospect group that could definitely contribute to this. Just to add on to that, NFL Buckeye says they already have a good team in the AHL with Rochester, one of the highest rated prospect pools in the NHL, absolutely. And I like this one here. They've locked up most of their young talent with what will be very team-friendly deals. Really, Kevin Adams has done a wonderful job of that, and the salary cap will only continue to go up, so those deals will net them even more value. He also goes on to say Devin Levi is going to be a stud in net. That's the one position we haven't discussed already. That franchise goaltender for the Buffalo Sabres, that's something they've kind of missed for quite a while. You got to go back all the way to Ryan Miller for that, and of course the Dominator before him. Just need to supplement the blue line a little bit. Yeah, sure, add a little bit of depth. But the salary cap situation has been managed very well from Kevin Adams and his team. And then Tiny Rick points out that they were actually competing for a playoff spot at one point in the season. They'll be a powerhouse, especially with teams like Tampa, Boston, Florida, and Toronto when they start dropping. And yeah, we could see a dramatic overhaul, a dramatic churn of powers in that division. And that's why we're going to talk about some of the other teams that finished below the Sabres in the standings. All right, let's get to the New Jersey Devils, our next team here. So Gabe Talks says stacked roster while still having plenty of cap space with multiple high-end prospects coming up. We're in perfect position to win multiple Stanley Cups over the decade. Hey, that's bold, especially in the salary cap era. But yeah, we saw the Devils take a huge step forward this season. That really goes to show what a full season of Jack Hughes can give you. Jesper Bratt's going to be part of that vision going forward. Hopefully they can extend Timo Meier, even though he'll be getting a little bit older at this point. Of course, you have the captain Nico Hischier, Selke Trophy finalist. You have a 27-goal scorer already in Dawson Mercer. You have Alexander Holtz. Defensively, this team's going to only be more beastly. It's more of a veteran group right now. You do have Kevin Ball, and you have Luke Hughes. We'll see what happens when he gets a full season under his belt. Simon Nemitz, right? Second overall pick, I believe, just last season. And you also have Seamus Casey. And relating back to Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier and also Jesper Bratt, I mean, you got to credit the front office for signing them to very team-friendly deals. So the salary cap has been managed pretty well. They do have some cap room to play with, although they do have some of those veteran defensemen that eventually will find their way out of the core when we get a few years down the road with some of these prospects being called up. Now, it will be interesting to see if Akira Schmid really is that franchise goaltender going forward. I don't know if we'll know that by the end of next year per se, but he did perform very well for most of this season and postseason. Not entirely sure if Lindy Ruff's going to be the coach going forward when we look at those prospects coming in a few years from now. I'm curious to see how they do without Andrew Brunette for this upcoming season, but overall, the Devils have a very, very bright future ahead. Now we have the Detroit Red Wings, and we have this comment here from Swim6956. You have to know Detroit is coming, and they will be good for a very long time. If even half of their good prospects work out, we'll talk about that in just a second. We need a 40 to 50 goal scorer, and the rebuild is nearly finished. Well, first of all, I ask you, can Alex DeBrincat be that 40 goal scorer for the Red Wings? Of course, it would be hard to pull off a trade with a team in the same division with the Senators, but really, that would be one good way to do it. You do have the cap space, and I already talked about Erik Karlsson, but anyway, we'll get to the youth, right? We're talking about the future. So the Red Wings, yeah, lots of great prospects, and they do have plenty of young forwards already playing for them right now that could be part of that core going forward, especially Lucas Raymond. He did take a bit of a step back in his sophomore year. Pretty typical, so I wouldn't be concerned about that at all. But you also have Jonathan Berggren, Joe Veleno, and Michael Rasmussen. Again, we'll see how they pan out over the next couple of years, and we'll see if they have an opportunity to be elevated in the lineup, but they do have some veterans right now in those spots. You also have to consider, of course, the forwards in the prospect group. Marco Kasper headlines that. So for them to have that future top six center would be huge for them if we're talking about coming out of the rebuild. Defensively, yeah, they're pretty set. You already have Moritz Seider, you have Simon Edvinsson, and you have a couple other defenders out there. William Wallinder, I think, is the one that gets talked about the most. They also have a franchise goaltending prospect in Sebastian Cossa. Now, I don't know when he's expected to get opportunity in the NHL, but the Red Wings will need that goaltending help going forward. A little bit of a downside here in that Zadina hasn't quite panned out for them, but they have lots of picks. Even in this year's draft, they have 3 second rounders, so they have more opportunity to just stockpile these prospects, make trades later on when they want to be even more competitive. And yeah, Steve Yzerman has done a very good job of managing the cap so far. We have a bit of this hot take here from Klomp Sauce. Red Wings will return to glory. They have one of the best GMs in hockey. Got to consider what Yzerman did with the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Seider pick was heavily questioned, but he won the Calder, great two-way skills, and they'll return to the playoffs for another 25 straight years. But yeah, they still have more work to be done, but it's all trending in the right direction. Now I'll touch on a couple of teams that I wouldn't necessarily spotlight as a top 3 or maybe even top 5 team when it comes to a bright future, but again, let me know your thoughts, guys. First of all, Seattle Kraken from Annie. Seattle, easily. They've already proven that they have moments of brilliance in the playoffs, and what they're going to do with Burakovsky back could be amazing. So with Seattle, they're in an interesting position in that they're succeeding primarily with a veteran group. So when you look at the core of players going forward, who does that consist of, right? You have Matty Beniers, probably wins the Calder. Jared McCann, I think, would still be part of that, even as he's getting into his later 20s. He already had a 40-goal season. And you have Vince Dunn. He'll be re-signed in the offseason. He's still pretty young himself. And I would think that Shane Wright would hopefully be a part of that as well. But when you look at the Kraken's roster right now, you can't really project which of those players is going to be a franchise cornerstone 3 or 4 years down the road. So that's one reason why I wouldn't say that they're among the brightest of futures in the NHL, although that's something that could change in the offseason. The draft is just a few days away. Seattle has their picks. They have 3 second rounders, so they have an opportunity in their third offseason to really bolster the prospect pool and maybe get it into the top 10 in the NHL with respect to that. And Ron Francis has done a good job of managing the cap. He's already quickly put together a competitive franchise. And I mean, you can't take that for granted. And they were very exciting to watch this year. But the idea here is, how will that transpire as we look into the future as some of those veterans kind of age out, as some of their contracts expire? Now we get to the Arizona Coyotes, and Dean, one of our MVP members, with a great comment here. They have a good young core with Keller. I'm looking at the second paragraph, by the way. Clayton Keller, Lawson Krause, Matthias Michelli, Dylan Guenther, and in the minors with Josh Doan, Connor Geekie, and of course, Logan Cooley. Plus you add all the draft capital they have. That's right, they have the 6th overall pick and the 12th overall pick in the first round alone. Just skipping ahead a bit here. Right now it's a long shot, but in the 3-year time frame, the Coyotes could be pretty respectable, at least as far as the product on the ice. And that's what we're focusing on. We're not going to talk about the whole arena situation. They were quite competitive this season, even though their record didn't show it. They were certainly much better than you would have thought just looking at that roster on paper. I think these are very strong points, and actually in one of our MVP videos, I talked about how I wouldn't be surprised if, with the Central Division kind of getting a little bit weaker here, that the Coyotes could even compete for a playoff spot in 2025. Let's also not forget Victor Soderstrom in the prospect pipeline, their top defenseman there. But the reason why I wouldn't vault the Coyotes, up as high as some of those other teams as earlier is because they never spend to the cap ceiling. It's been forever since they did anything like that. They've talked about being more competitive this offseason to get good instead of trading out their players, but I got to see the proof in the pudding here, right? So I especially looked at 2024 when they could possibly be in a position to go after some free agents. So I'm certainly thinking they're a team to watch, but again, right now, just given their history of being kind of a farm team for other NHL clubs out there, I'm just not sold 100% just yet. Also, we have the Anaheim Ducks. So Dan, one of our other MVPs here, says you got, of course, Trevor Zegras, Troy Terry, and Mason McTavish. You do have some other veterans out there to help with their development. Yeah, the Ducks are a team we can definitely discuss, especially given that they're selecting second overall in the draft. I'm really excited to see what happens there. They do have some good defensive prospects as well, like Pavel Mintyukov and Olen Zellweger, to complement a player like Jamie Drysdale. So they do need to really reconstruct that entire roster, especially on defense. I'm a little bit concerned about the John Gibson situation. I would think that they would entertain the idea of trading him out, but his contract and history of injuries is not really ideal for other clubs out there, but we'll see what happens over the next couple of seasons as Gibson has, many more years on his career theoretically. Then we get to the Canadiens, and JV says you got Caulfield signed long-term, Suzuki signed long-term, 5th overall draft pick. They have another first rounder as well. So yeah, that should definitely give fans hope. Kent Hughes has done a good job already, and Martin St. Louis has been a good voice behind the bench there. They also have young defensemen already on their roster who are considered good young talents like Caden Gooley and Justin Barron. There are some other players in the prospect system. Defenseman Lane Hudson, arguably their next best player in that pool after Slavkovsky, Owen Beck, Philip Major. We do have to see how Slavkovsky progresses if he's going to be a top-line player. But even so, if we look 3 or even 4 years ahead, you still have like Gallagher under contract and you have Josh Anderson. You got to see what happens with the Carey Price situation, figure out who your next franchise goaltender will be. So there are still some questions with Montreal. Kirby Dach, don't want to forget about his development over the past season. But yeah, they are trending up for sure. And a couple teams that really weren't talked about in the comments all that much. The Senators, of course, even if they do lose Alex DeBrincat, they still have a great top 6. They still have to figure out their franchise goaltender as well, but that's a team that has definitely taken a step forward. The Blue Jackets are really interesting because we've seen them get more competitive this offseason with the defensive upgrades they've made with Provorov and also with Damon Severson. Is this a team that's going to be good for the next 2 to 3 years, or is it going to be beyond that, right? So with the core right now, you do have Johnny Gaudreau. Do you want to build around him for the short term, or do you want to build around some of the young players who are on the roster and contributing, plus the prospects? So I'm talking about Kent Johnson. Of course, Kirill Marchenko had a great season. You still have Zach Werenski with many, many, many great years ahead. Let's not forget about him. But I'm also talking about the prospect pool with David Jiricek, Denton Matejchuk, and Stanislav Svozil. I also kind of consider the Kings to be sort of this hybrid where they could maybe even compete for a Stanley Cup the next year. They've done a good job managing the cap so far, and they have a really good prospect pool with Brandt Clark, Jordan Spence, Alex Turcotte. Quentin Byfield this year, I think, is going to absolutely go off. So I'm intrigued to see where the Kings go this year and next year as well. Could they possibly try to win a Stanley Cup with Anze Kopitar still on the roster? Or are they going to build around somebody like Byfield in the future? And we do have the Chicago Blackhawks with Connor Bedard, but really, that team is being built from the ground up. Really, it's a whole new team going into the next couple of seasons. So it's really too early to determine how bright their future is going forward. But there are 2 other teams that we haven't gotten to who have been competitive. They've been in the playoffs in recent years, but I think that they actually have a fairly bright future going forward. I'll try to make the case here as concisely as possible. First of all, the Minnesota Wild. Now, the next couple of years are tough because they have over $14.5 million committed to the Ryan Suter and Zach Parise buyouts. That's a lot of cap being swallowed up just from that. But if we look at 3 years from now, right, you have Kirill Kaprizov. He'll still be producing quite a bit. You have Joel Eriksson Ek. He'll be in his late 20s, great two-way center there. And you have Matt Boldy, who's already a star in the NHL. And then you add to it what has been considered as recent as this year by The Athletic, the top prospect pool in the NHL. A big piece of that has to be Marco Rossi because the Wild, they are still missing that true number 1 center. But you have other franchise cornerstones in the making with the likes of winger Liam Ogren. You have Daniil Yurov as well at that position. Defensively, you have Brock Faber. He almost won a national championship with Minnesota this year. You also have Carson Lambos. And again, kind of like the Red Wings, you already have that top goaltending prospect, actually the tops in the NHL right now in Jesper Wallstedt. The other team here is the Dallas Stars. Yeah, it's kind of weird considering this was a team that was built around Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin. They have a 39-year-old Joe Pavelski. You know, they had Ryan Suter on the team, but hear me out here, right? Now, in a few years, Jamie Benn will be off the books. Seguin's under contract until 2027, though. But you take a look at this core of players. They have Rope Hintz, who led the playoffs in scoring, even though he never went to the final. You have Jason Robertson. You already have Miro Heiskanen, who's among the top 5 defensemen in the NHL, I would have to say. Jake Ottinger had kind of a bad playoffs, but outside of that has been great so far. Wyatt Johnston was a 20-goal scorer this year as a very young rookie. Ty Dellandrea was a contributor for this team. You also have Thomas Harley and Nils Lundqvist for your defensive depth. And the prospect pool, while not being at the top of the NHL, I'm a big fan of Logan Stankoven as a possible top 6 winger or center. You have Leon Bischel as well for defensive prospects and Christian Kyrou as well. So you have a great core of players already producing, already helping this team make deep runs in the playoffs, and you'll have some prospects that can be good supporting cast members. All right, guys. Well, anyway, who do you think has the brightest future? Let me know in the comments down below, and stick around for more content throughout the 2023 NHL offseason. See the pinned comment down below if you want some more ideas for what to watch next. I always have stuff that you can check out there. Leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new and want more of this good stuff. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, Twisters. I'm Nick, and I'll catch you later. Ciao for now.